There's a moment that doesn't hurt enough to call pain, but it doesn't pass either. It sits there, low in the chest. Like a weight you forgot was added, it shows up in quiet places, in the pause before you answer, in the second before you say yes, in the stillness after someone finishes speaking and waits for your response. You feel it. Then you move past it, almost automatically, not because you didn't notice it, because you did, and something in you decided it was easier not to stay there. Most people think ignoring something means you never heard it, but this is different. This is hearing it clearly. And choosing to look away, there's a subtle tension when it happens, a soft tightening, a hesitation that barely lasts a breath. Then the familiar motion of going forward anyway. It doesn't feel dramatic. It feels normal. So normal that you don't question it. You tell yourself it's nothing. You tell yourself you're overthinking. You tell yourself it will pass if you keep moving, and it does pass, at least on the surface. But something else remains, something quieter, something that doesn't ask for attention anymore. That's the part most people miss. Because what fades isn't the feeling, it's the trust in it. You learn early how to override certain signals, not through force, through repetition. The first few times it takes effort. You pause. You feel unsure. You debate. Later, you don't debate at all. You respond. You adapt. You continue. And you call that maturity. There's a strange exhaustion that comes from this. Not the kind that sleep fixes. Not the kind that shows on the body. It feels more like distance from yourself. You start noticing it in small ways. You don't know what you want when someone asks. You hesitate before simple choices. You feel relief when plans are canceled, even if you wanted them once. But that's not the part most people notice. They notice how calm you seem, how understanding, how accommodating. They notice how rarely you make things difficult, how easily you adjust, how well you read the room. What they don't see is the constant inner negotiation, the quiet silencing, the subtle turning away from a voice that speaks softly and never insists. That voice never shouts. It doesn't demand, it doesn't argue its case, it just says a few words, then waits, and waiting is dangerous because if nothing responds, it learns. It learns not to interrupt, not to interfere, not to bother you with inconvenient truths. You don't decide to ignore it one day. There's no moment of intention. It happens gradually. Through moments when listening led to discomfort, through times when honoring it caused distance, through experiences where staying true felt like losing something important. So you adjusted. You became skilled at sensing others, at anticipating needs, at smoothing edges before they cut anyone. And somewhere along the way, the inner signal became background noise, still there, but faint. Sometimes it shows up as a heaviness after a conversation. Sometimes as a strange emptiness after doing the right thing. Sometimes as a tightness you can't explain. You don't name it. You just carry it. People might call this being selfless, or kind, or emotionally intelligent, but that's not the whole picture because there's something quieter happening underneath, a slow reshaping of attention, a habit of looking outward first, a reflex to question yourself before questioning the moment. You start trusting other people's reactions more than your own sensations. You believe the atmosphere over the feeling, you believe the story over the signal, and it works for a long time. Until it doesn't. The breaking point isn't loud, it's not a collapse, it's more like numbness. You stop reacting the way you used to, not because you've healed, but because the inner commentary has gone quiet. That silence can feel like peace at first. Less conflict, less friction, but there's also less presence, less clarity, and that's where it starts to change, not outwardly. Internally, you begin to sense a gap between what happens and what you feel. Between what you say and what resonates. You might tell yourself you're tired or detached or just going through a phase, but there's something else at work. The inner voice you learn to ignore isn't intuition in the dramatic sense. It's not foresight or magic or wisdom. It's simpler than that. It's the part of you that registers impact before explanation, the part that notices subtle harm before it has language, the part that feels alignment or misalignment without justification. It doesn't give reasons, it gives sensations. And because it doesn't argue logically, it's easy to dismiss, especially in environments that reward understanding over honesty, especially in relationships where harmony feels more important than accuracy. So you learned to reinterpret it, to soften it, to override it with context. You told yourself stories to make the discomfort reasonable. You reframed, you empathized, you explained. And each time you did, that voice stepped back a little more. This isn't self-betrayal in the dramatic sense. It's adaptation, a skill. The skill of staying connected, of keeping peace, of minimizing rupture. But every skill has a cost, and the cost here is internal credibility. When a signal goes unanswered often enough, it stops sending urgency, not because it was wrong, but because it learned you wouldn't respond. That's the realization most people never name. The inner voice didn't disappear. It adjusted to your listening habits. It learned to whisper, then to murmur, then to fall silent unless something is truly unbearable. And by the time it speaks again, the damage is already familiar. You might notice this when you suddenly feel too much over something small, or when a minor moment feels unbearably heavy. That's not overreaction, that's backlog. Years of unheard signals arriving all at once. But this isn't about blame. There was a reason you learned this pattern. Listening early may not have been safe or welcomed or practical. So you survived by becoming perceptive instead of reactive, attuned instead of expressive, and that worked until the cost became internal distance. The insight comes quietly, not as a revelation. More like recognition. You realize the voice you thought was doubt was actually information. The hesitation you labeled weakness was awareness. The discomfort you minimized was accuracy without words. It wasn't trying to control you, it was trying to inform you, and you weren't wrong to ignore it then, but you're not the same person now. The ending doesn't arrive with certainty, it arrives with softness. You don't suddenly listen perfectly. You don't become decisive or loud or unyielding. You just pause a little longer. You notice the sensation before the explanation. You let it exist without fixing it immediately. The voice doesn't demand trust. It only responds to attention. And even that happens slowly. There's no resolution here, just a subtle return. A sense that something inside you is being acknowledged again. Not obeyed, not followed blindly, just heard. And that changes the weight, not by removing it, but by letting it rest where it belongs.